Hello, everyone. So, today we're going to be talking about the violence that exists in the anti violence movement, specifically the gender based violence movement. So, we're going to be unpacking things that need to be unpacked. We're going to be talking about things that are usually not talked about, and you're going to learn about the work that I do and some of the experiences that those of us that do this work have. So, you don't want to miss this. Stay tuned. Do not forget to like, subscribe, comment, all the things. Be right back. So, first things first. In the credits, you saw the opening credits. You saw a land acknowledgement. And so the land acknowledgement is the acknowledging, not to sound redundant, but it's what it is. It's the acknowledging of or the acknowledgement of us living on land that does not belong to us. It is the understanding that our very continued existence on this land perpetuates the legacy of historical trauma that has been inflicted on the indigenous people that have occupied the lands that we live on for literally thousands of years. And so I open with a land acknowledgement so that people know that I am acknowledging where the land that I am living on, who the original as we can get, who the original inhabitants of that land were. And so while my videos are typically filmed in New Jersey, and the original inhabitants of New Jersey were the Lenape, I am currently filming in Puerto Rico, which is my birthplace, my original place, so to speak, as original as we can get in the post transatlantic slave trade days. So, considering that I am filming in Puerto Rico, and the original indigenous people for thousands of years were the Taino, the land acknowledgement for this video is going to look a little bit different. There's going to be the acknowledgement of the Lenape, because that is where I live. That is the land. Those were the custodians of the land that I live on. And I'm going to acknowledge the Taino because I am in Puerto Rico and I do have Taino ancestry running through my veins. Um, I am part Taino. And so it's important for me, specifically in this video, because I am in Puerto Rico filming, that I acknowledge that. So I wanted to get that out of the way and that discussed so that everyone understood what the land acknowledgements meant, so that there weren't any questions about that. Now, let's talk about what gender based violence is. I remember when I was really young, my mom used to tell me that best way for you to talk about a topic is to define the topic when you introduce the topic. So let's define what gender based violence is. So, gender based violence is the violence that is inflicted on people because of their gender, right? And so what we understand is that gender-based violence is um, is violence inflicted within our society on female, or women, in addition to gender minorities. So those are your trans community members, those are your non binary community members, and other members of the LGBTQ plus community. We also understand that bisexual women specifically experience gender based violence at higher rates than their heterosexual counterparts. So, and we're going to talk about all of that in a little bit. Um, this video is going to be a lot more informational and instructional than, as well as structured, than my reaction videos, because a big part of what I do is community education. I dedicate my a large part of my work to educating the masses and educating the communities within where I work. And so I'm very well versed in facilitating workshops, which is what my business is. I have a business facilitating workshops on gender-based violence related issues, as well as cultural humility related issues, including diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, as well as accessibility. So DEIB/A is the work that I do. So we understand what gender based violence is. We understand the work that I do and what some of my background is. So, just to give you some additional information about me, I've been doing gender based violence advocacy work since 2011. I started off as what was called back then in 2011 a rape crisis counselor, and I worked with survivors of sexual violence that had been newly victimized. In the beginning, it was within the last 3 days, so survivors had 3 days from the date of the assault to come forward and have medical attention for having been sexually assaulted. Now, they expanded that to 5 days in the state of New Jersey. And then after that, they expanded it to 7 days, sometimes even longer, depending on, a case by case basis and the criteria as well as the expertise of the forensic nurse examiner that is on that case. Now, here in the state of New Jersey, survivors of sexual violence, specifically survivors of sexual violence, have the right to go to a police station or a hospital and disclose having been sexually assaulted and have as much or as little intervention with the involvement of the law enforcement entities or the forensic nurse examiner entities or the advocacy piece that they want. So survivors can go to the hospital and elect to have no law enforcement involved, have the kit collected, and then the kit is held for 20 years. Survivors have the right to go to the hospital and ask to speak to just the advocate, not the nurse, not the law enforcement, just the advocate. Survivors have the right to also speak to just the nurse, no advocate, no law enforcement. So the state of New Jersey has really done a lot to ensure that survivors are empowered with all parts of the sexual violence evidence collection piece of it. So that's again a lot of the instructional piece of the work that I do, the training, if you will, the workshops, if you will. Now, let's talk about the movement. So, within the anti-gender based violence movement, Black women specifically have experienced a lot of oppression within the movement, right? So the anti-gender based violence movement was born from the civil rights movement. There is no anti-gender based violence movement without the civil rights movement. And Black women were the backbone of the civil rights movement. Now, we're not going to talk about my Latinidad right now. We're not going to talk about the efforts that were made by Puerto Rican militant, powerful activists that fought tooth and nail for basic civil rights and basic human rights. Not in this video. We'll talk about that later. But I do want to acknowledge and hold space, right? Because there's no denying the blackness in me. I'm not African American. That's not a part of my story. That's not a part of my historical trauma. I am very much Latina in and out. But I'm a black woman living in the United States, so I definitely feel the experience of being black. I feel the intersectionality. I feel the oppression. I feel the violence. And within the anti gender based violence work, there is that racism, there is that intersectionality, there is that oppression, even when your leaders are people of color. We've heard this before, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And so it's important for us when we do this work, do what we need to do to give ourselves that space, to give ourselves that honor, and to give ourselves that love so that we can continue to do this very important, life changing, world changing work. Okay, so now let's talk about what advocacy is. I talked a little bit about that, but I want to make sure that everyone has a lot of information on the importance of advocacy. So, advocacy is the act of supporting a cause, any cause. It is the act of raising awareness. It is the act of of truly producing changes in policy. And so it is marching on Washington. It is writing to your legislators, which are all calls of action that we're going to talk about at the end. But it is truly creating, the efforts of creating that policy change that we need to have. Advocates also support services, whether it is the hotline services, the accompaniments to police stations or hospitals or courtrooms, or providing information or making systems more understandable for survivors or assisting survivors in understanding processes. All of that is included in advocacy as well. So when we think about the amazing strides that advocates have made, I want to call to mind a couple of things. So we have things like Jean Day, right? It's happens during the month of April. It happens during the month of April, and the purpose of Jean Day is, or Denim Day, Denim Day. The purpose of Denim Day is to wear one's most provocative, tight set of genes that we have so that we can honor the survivor of sexual violence in Italy in 1999 who was raped wearing a pair of jeans. And when the case was brought against the her driver instructor, so she was taking a driving course, and her instructor raped her. And the judge said that because she was wearing very tight blue jeans, she must have been complicit in her rape, therefore making her rape not a rape, but a consensual act, because she did not put too much effort in stopping her attacker. And so, obviously, that caused outrage in the world. And so, from that outrage was born Denim Day. And so, much like a lot of other historical events, particularly those that are unjust in nature, a movement was born. And so we have in mind also, for example, the situation of, or the Me Too movement. Let's not call it a situation, let's call it what it is, a movement. So we have this, the Me Too movement. Now, the Me Too movement in the beginning was hijacked by white women that were taught, that were disclosing having been sexually harassed or having experienced sexual violence. Sexual harassment is a form of sexual violence. And their stories and their disclosures are valid and important and vital to the anti gender based violence movement. But they did not start the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement was started by Tarana Burke. And Tarana Burke was, now she has been very open about what led her to give birth to the Me Too movement, and how the Me Too movement allowed her to process her own traumas, specifically with gender based violence. And so, what's also important to understand is that, in the situation of Tarana Burke, as Black women, we are highly sexualized. um, when we experience gender based violence, we are usually not believed, or our violence is excused. And so coming forward is all the more difficult, because we come with this experience with intersectionality, which, by the way, is not my term. It is, intersectionality is a term that is coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to talk about the different systems of oppression that affect us as people, and how those systems keep us from navigating society in a healthy and just way. And so intersectionality has a lot to do with the anti gender based violence work. So now that I've talked about that, let's talk about the meat and potatoes of this video. First and foremost, I'm just gonna shameless plug. Do not forget to like, subscribe, share, comment in the video. If you like my content, please do not forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. That's important. All the things, because that is what helps me with the algorithm. Now, how does this violence that happens, that occurs, that lives and festers in the anti gender based violence work perpetuate itself? Well, we are a product of our environment. We are a product of our society. And if those of us that do the work start to become jaded, or start to believe that we're better than our peers because we are woke, or because we have reached a level of enlightenment, not in the Buddhist way, but we've reached a level of enlightenment in terms of our own humanity and our experience in this society, then we are already beginning to do a disservice to the people that we are meant to serve. The core value in advocacy has to be cultural humility. We cannot be effective advocates if we are not culturally humble. Now, cultural humility is also not a term that I have coined. It is also not something that I've discovered. It does not belong to me. I will link the reference videos that I'm citing in this video in the description of the video, so that everyone can get all the information that I have learned from, and you can all learn yourselves. And these are all things that I use in the trainings that I facilitate and in the workshops that I facilitate. So here's another shameless plug. If you want me to come live in living color, in person, or virtually to your place of business, to your place of work, to your office, to your school, on campus, anything like that, I'm going to put the Google Forms registration um, form in the description, and I'm going to put my contact information in the description as well. And you can reach out to me, and I would gladly come and talk to your team, whatever your team is, even if that means parents, about the important work that I do, about cultural humility, intersectionality, all that stuff. If you saw something flying, that was my son who threw his bracelet accidentally at me. Now, um, so if we have lost the concept of cultural humility because we believe that we are perfect because we do this work, we're lost. We're as bad as our oppressors are. And that's going to make us violent when we do this work. Now, what is cultural humility? Cultural humility is a journey. Cultural humility is a process where we learn who we are, how we see people, and how we experience society so that we can then learn how to work with others. It doesn't mean that you read about, for example, how Mexicans um, handle pain, or how Black women experience trauma. We can't generalize. If we're generalizing, we're doing a disservice to the people that we serve, and that's racist. So we must learn from the people that are in front of us. If I'm meeting with Susie Q, because Susie Q has experienced gender based violence in whatever form the gender based violence insulted her and impacted her, I am going to ask Susie Q how she navigates trauma. I'm going to ask Susie Q how her culture supports or hurts her navigating trauma. I'm going to ask Susie Q how I can help or support her in her recovery. That is what I am going to do as I am tapping into the skills that I've learned of cultural humility. Now, cultural humility also for me has allowed me to do a lot of work within myself and understand my implicit biases, understand my hangups, understand the complicated relationship I have with the United States and its society, understand my proud Puerto Rican how my proud Puerto Rican heritage plays a strong role in who I am, and how that influences, for good, bad, or indifferent, how I see the world. And so but I continue to do the work, and that's a level of work that has to be done. I continue to do the work because I understand that if I do not continue to do the work, I am lost. And the legacy that I am building for my children are also lost. By the way, for those that are wondering, my son is a teenager. He's not a small child. So this is definitely an appropriate conversation for me to have around my son, because I want my son to be a healthy member of society and not hurt people. So he needs to understand about gender-based violence. And so that's why he's listening in the background. He also loves his mother very much, and so he likes to spend time with me whenever he can. So it's important for us as advocates to continue to do the work. Sometimes, and this is hard to hear, sometimes as advocates, we must learn how to manage our manager. Now, what does that mean? That means that you understand how you can stay safe, because we're also trauma informed, and you use that sense of safety to your advantage. so that you can do the work that has to get done. It's interesting. I had a conversation today with my aunt who lives in Puerto Rico, and she is doing very similar work. And we talked about cultural humility, and we talked about the journey. We also talked about the violence that's existing in the anti-gender based violence movement, and it's palpable and it's systemic. And it's insulting that as we are navigating systems of oppression and systems of harm and systems of violence, we are experiencing, as advocates and as activists, we are experiencing harm and violence against us by the hands or at the hands of our leaders, those that are supposed to support us. So let's talk about it. So, what are some things that we can do? So, educate yourself and others. That could include, again, description, have me come in and talk to your team. Have me come in, I can talk to your team. We can talk about these uncomfortable topics. We can talk about sexual harassment in the workplace. We can talk about trauma informed care. We can talk about safety planning. We can talk about what happens if you work with someone who has experienced gender based violence and how you can help your colleague. All those things. I offer tailored workshops and trainings. My None of my trainings and workshops are one size fit all. None of my trainings and workshops are intended to be for everyone as a whole. I make sure that I make them specific for the audience that I am speaking in front of. So, educate yourself and others, support organizations that are doing the good work, support the humans in those organizations that are doing the good work. Those humans are lifesavers. And for the most part, advocates are, if they're not severely underpaid, they're volunteers where they don't get paid. So support your volunteers, support your organizations, support the professionals that do the advocacy work because that's important. Advocate for change, use your voice for the change that you want to see. I know it sounds corny, but let's be honest. We need to use our voice. Whatever change you want to see in the world, be that change. It's what we tell our children, and we have to keep that. We have to be the change that you want to see because our children depend on that. So, I want to end with this: self care. Advocates, if you're listening, advocates, if you hear me, advocates, if you are um, needing some reprieve, I hear you. I see you. I am you. And we will create the world that we want to see. We will create a healthy, safe world where there aren't victims and we aren't having to talk about resiliency and we aren't going to have to talk about recovery because it will be healthy and safe. And if we don't see it in our lifetime, at the very least, we are planting seeds of hope. We are planting seeds of safety. And we are planting seeds of love. So, self care. If you need assistance, let me know. My information is in the description below. Thank you for doing the good work. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of my community. Thank you. Have a wonderful, safe holiday.